And now it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Katie Nicholl to speak. Katie may be known to many of you for her work as an author and as Vanity Fair's royal correspondent. But you may not know that a little over 2 years ago, she was diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma. She's one of our lovely Faces of Cholangiocarcinoma 2025, and she has a remarkable story to tell. Katie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay on the microphone? I've been told that there's a clock there. I'm very used to clocks because I do a lot of broadcasting, and if I go over 10 minutes, I'm going to be swiftly cut off. So I will try my hardest not to be, but I bet you I'm the first broadcaster that does that. So anyway, it's lovely to be with you all here today. Many of you who I now consider good friends, so it's lovely to see you all. I remember the very first time I attended this convention. It was 2 years ago. It was back in May 2023. And at the time, I was 10 weeks out of surgery. And I'd just started a course of preventative chemotherapy. I was on a 6-month course of capecitabine. And I just presented the coronation of King Charles III from Westminster Abbey for NBC Network in America. And given my medical team had told me that I probably wouldn't be back on my feet, let alone back in the gym, for about 4 or 5 months after my procedure, I considered myself to be doing pretty well, all things considered. But it wasn't easy, and that's not to make light of what I went through and what many others go through. And I think I presented a very strong outer front and took a lot of refuge in my work. But I mean, I was absolutely terrified, because getting diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma is life-changing, as anyone in this room and listening on this conference around the world will know. But I've always considered knowledge to be power, and I wanted to know more about this disease and how I could survive it. And what gives me great hope, and why I'm here today, is because of the groundbreaking work of the AMMF charity, which is really pioneering research, collecting very, very important data, and ultimately raising awareness, and in doing that, saving lives. When I was told I had cholangiocarcinoma, I was 46, and I had never even heard of this disease. When I read up about bile duct cancer, as it's also known, it was terrifying, and what became apparent from just a very brief amount of research is that it's not necessarily a rare cancer, but certainly a lesser known cancer with a terrible survival rate. And while there are some treatments, the only potential cure is surgery. So it's not hard then to understand why cholangiocarcinoma is known as a silent killer. It's very hard to detect, and the symptoms are incredibly vague. Patients are often told that they're suffering from IBS, sent home, and in many cases, given paracetamol for the pain. I was a very busy and fit and healthy mum to 2 young children, juggling a home and a very busy, demanding career, when I went to my GP at the end of 2022. I'd been suffering from indigestion, actually, and heart palpitations. Nothing serious, but I just felt that something wasn't right. It had been a very busy year for me. The Queen had died. I'd written 2 books. I was making a podcast. The GP, when I went to see him, thought I was probably on the brink of a burnout. I put it down to stress, but he did run bloods. They all came back as completely normal. But he did agree to send me for a scan, because I was convinced there was actually something wrong with my heart. And that scan actually led to a further scan of my abdomen, which I pushed for. I said I wanted to have another scan on my abdomen. And that was when they found something suspicious on my liver. They did a further MRI, and in that MRI discovered a tumour the size of my palm on the left lobe of my liver. I'm looking at my kids there. They're holding up the recent pieces that I've written for the Mail. But anyone that's been diagnosed with cancer knows that it is something that just turns your world upside down. And there is that, certainly for me, there was that sense of disbelief. I was fit, I was a regular runner, I trained, I wasn't a big drinker, and apart from those heart palpitations and that sense of indigestion, I didn't feel unwell. I was incredibly lucky because my tumour was operable, which isn't the case for everyone. I had nearly half of my liver removed by the brilliant team at the NHS, Royal Free Hospital in North London. My diagnosis was on Valentine's Day, 2023. 10 days later, I was in the Royal Free having my operation by the hugely talented Dr. Dora Pisanu. Dora and I have created an amazing bond between us, and she said, I'm in for a fight, I'm in for a challenge. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was confident that she was going to be able to get this beast, as she called it, out, and she did. My recovery was tough. As I said, I went on this preventative course of chemotherapy, capecitabine, came here to this conference, met Professor Bridgewater, who we're going to be hearing from, I think, shortly after me. And he said, one day you're going to have to tell your story because we need to hear more of these stories of survivors. And it is thanks to Dora, who my children call Dora the Explorer, that I'm here today. Without her, I simply wouldn't be. And I had the very best care that I could have asked for at the Royal Free. And I was also very lucky in that I had a proactive GP who was willing to send me for that scan. But I'm also acutely aware that I'm an anomaly and that too many patients who have cholangiocarcinoma don't get diagnosed in time or get misdiagnosed, and they don't get the care and the treatment that they need. If they did, the survival rate for this cancer would be much better than it is. For many people, it's also a postcode lottery, which is terribly unfair. I live in London. I'm 20 minutes away from the Royal Free in North London. It has one of the best hepatopancreatic biliary departments in the country, I think some would say in the world. And I was incredibly lucky to have an amazing centre right on my doorstep. But those living further from the capital have to fight much harder to get the treatment that I had. One of the things the AMMF campaigns to do is to have better access for anyone suffering from cholangiocarcinoma, better access to the best surgeons and to the best treatment. We want a deal, a fairer, faster deal for all cholangiocarcinoma patients, that they all have access to treatments, to an accurate diagnosis, to an early diagnosis, because that paves the way for a greater survival route. Too many people are sent home misdiagnosed or simply not diagnosed when a simple liver function blood test, which costs very, very little, can detect cholangiocarcinoma. Tragically, it can take weeks, sometimes months, to get a correct diagnosis because GPs aren't aware of cholangiocarcinoma, nor do they realise, as Helen pointed out earlier, that it's on the rise. And it's on the rise in young people. There is this misconception that it's an old person's disease. It isn't. Many of the friends I've made on this journey are young, they're fit, they're contributing to society, they have families, they have jobs. They are the faces of the brilliant cholangiocarcinoma campaign. We featured it in the Mail on Sunday. It's been featured in Vanity Fair. Zandra Rhodes and I went on to the Lorraine show. We really are trying to change the narrative around this cancer. It's not an old person's illness. It's affecting so many more people than we realise. I've been very affected by some of the messages that I've received from patients and their families who've got in touch with me since I went public with my diagnosis. I only wrote about my diagnosis this year, in fact. And I'd just like to share a few of the messages that I received on my social media channels, because they were deeply affecting. My friend Hayley had this kind of liver cancer. Her symptoms were missed. The NHS issued her with inhalers for asthma back in October because she had inflammation on her lungs. When she eventually went private, 2 tumours were found on her liver. She was told she had 18 months to live. She didn't even get a month. She passed away on Tuesday, leaving behind her husband and 2-year-old little girl. Many messages thanking us, the AMMF, for putting the spotlight on cholangiocarcinoma. Because if cholangiocarcinoma can be detected earlier, more people like me will survive. And there you go, I've been cut off. Thank you very much, just in time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.